friends, welcome or welcome back if you have been here for a while. My name is Dawn, and this is Living a Wordful Life. And I'm in the process of sharing my testimony with you guys. And yes, it's about me, but it's not about me, it's about Jesus. And the reason I'm sharing it is to just show an example of how our lives can drastically change when we put Jesus in the forefront. And if you go back, the last video was chapter 1, and the previous video is the introduction, and it kind of gives you just an overview. And today I'm going to share chapter 2 with you guys. And the title of chapter 2 is Here We Go Again. And I'm just going to read it to you. I thought that'd be the easiest way. So it says, just as we began to settle in our new hometown, my dad got a new job and we had to move again. As a child, I wondered why all the other fathers stayed at the same job for years and years, but yet my dad changed every few years. Looking back, I now know that my dad was an alcoholic, and keeping a steady job was very hard for someone with that condition. Our next stop on our quest for a home was a town called Eunice, Louisiana. It was a little bigger than Rayne, Louisiana. The population of Eunice was 9,235. This move was rough on all of us. It was farther for my mom to drive to and from her work. We had to make all new friends at a new school, and this school seemed to be a little bit different from the other schools that we had attended in the past. Maybe it was because we had not grown up there. Maybe it was because the other kids knew that we didn't have money. But the kids there were very established in their cliques. I learned where the term mean girls came from, and I was made fun of for making good grades and being nerdy. For the first time ever, I hated going to school. Me and my brother had stomach aches and didn't want to go to school, so much so that my mom shared her ulcer medicine with us. We did manage to make some friends. My closest friends were also considered to be goody-goody. I never understood why that was a bad thing. A few years later, when I was in 8th grade, I traded in my glasses for contact lenses and cut and styled my hair for the first time. A few of the boys in our class were starting to notice me and talk to me more. Apparently, this prompted a meeting between the mean girls in my class. One day, one of the group leader's sidekicks approached me and told me that they decided that I can be in their friends group now, but I would have to ditch my other nerdy friends. I thought to myself, wait, what? Are you kidding me? Absolutely not. I'm so happy that I made that decision back then, and I am still friends with my group of little nerdy friends these 50 years later. I remember trying out for cheerleader. I felt that I did pretty well on tryout day and was hopeful. No surprise, though, the mean girl group all made the team and I didn't. The leader of the group literally tripped and fell during tryouts, but still managed to not only make the team, but was also awarded the title of team captain. I stayed at this Catholic school through the end of 9th grade, until my mom called us in for a family meeting. Apparently, just overnight, the Catholic school doubled their tuition. There were 4 kids in my family, so my mom was asking for 2 volunteers because we couldn't afford to pay double tuition. I happily volunteered to go to the public school in the fall to get away from my current situation. Anything was better than this, I thought. I just want to mention that at this stage in my life, I wanted to be a nun. I wanted to be a nun who was a teacher and then would be later promoted to a school principal. Very specific. However, after a few school dances, my plans changed. Just before leaving 9th grade, I met a guy who was in 10th grade. He asked me to the spring sports banquet. William was a football jock. I had never had a boyfriend until then. He and I dated for a couple of years. I liked him and I enjoyed his company. My family really liked him too. I shared my faith with him, and he decided to go to all of the classes and became Catholic a few years later. Onward to Eunice High School. Oh my goodness, what a transition. First of all, the school had air conditioning. Yes, that does mean that all the schools I went to prior did not have air conditioning. Secondly, I could wear jeans to school. This school seemed so big to me. We had 156 kids in our entire class versus a Catholic school that only had around 80. There were clubs and specialty classes for academically gifted kids. Yes, sign me up for all the things. Guess what? I even made the cheer team. I was thriving and so happy to have landed in this place. I remember the first day of typing class. This really cute boy walked into class. I just looked at him and to myself said, "Oh man," because I thought he was really cute, but I knew that I had a boyfriend. Later that year, I set that cute boy up with a friend of mine named Lisa, and we went on a double date. I thought, if I can't have him, maybe Lisa can. I was sitting in the front seat of the car with William, and Lisa was in the back seat of her setup date, Benji. It didn't work out for them. In fact, they never even had a second date. Benji became a really good friend of mine in high school. We lost touch after high school because in the 1980s, cell phones, computers, and social media had not even been created yet. High school years were the best. I was in every club that I could possibly be in. I was in the Spanish club, the math club, the key club, the library club, where I was the school's president and even held an office at the state level by being Louisiana Library Club's historian. I was a senior class treasurer, junior varsity and varsity cheerleader, a member of homecoming court, and was voted class favorite both junior and senior year. I made many friends, and I'm still friends with many of them all these years later. William and I broke up just after a couple years of dating. He broke up with me because I felt more like a sister to him. I will just leave it at that. I was devastated, but moved on and dated a few other people until the day I met Ray. We had cheerleader practice at one of my friends' houses, and I parked my car across the street. I parked in what seemed like public domain to me, but it was in Ray's yard. He was 21 years old, and I was 16. He was such a hottie. He was a smooth talker, and I was just enamored. My parents allowed me to date him, but they did not approve of him. I guess they figured he was just a passing phase until the day he asked my dad for my hand in marriage. My dad and mom actually said no. They both saw in him many qualities that were in my dad. He liked to party and he loved all the women. I had a heart-to-heart talk with my mom, and she told me that she didn't want me to marry Ray. I responded with, "Don't make me choose." I did things my way back then. I did not seek God, nor did I even consider what He wanted for me and my life. This was a new trend that I had developed after arriving in this seemingly fun, active life I was living. I had a partial scholarship at a Catholic college in New Orleans, Louisiana at Dominican College. It was an all-girls school. My parents had no money for college, but I got student loans and my partial scholarship paid for my meals. I worked part-time at the college chapel with a nun, Sister Mary. I set up for Mass and did a few odd and end jobs in the office, like making copies with a mimeograph machine. I can still remember the smell of those copies made with that machine, the purple cold ink. If you know, you know. I made $20 a week at church with my side job. I used my $20 to buy one Coke and a bus fare home for the weekend. I could go home, do laundry, and go out with Ray. This worked out for the first year, but then Dominican College closed its doors because of low enrollment. Where would I finish school? I was studying merchandising. I found a school in Dallas, Texas where I could finish my degree. This meant more student loans. I stayed at home for a year in between and planned our wedding. My mom and I designed my dress, and we made it together. It was beautiful. We sewed thousands of seed pearls onto the Alissonce lace that covered the entire dress. Just part of the lace that covered my hand took over 8 hours to sew. The wedding was amazing. The marriage, not so much. My husband was working full-time. I was going to school full-time and working part-time. Making ends meet was not only hard, but nearly impossible. After bills were paid, we had $20 left for gas and groceries for the entire week. We lived in Dallas, Texas. I was driving an old Chevy Chevette that had a crashed front end, no air conditioning, and a window that only rolled down about an inch. Rainy days were the worst. The windows would fog up, and I could barely see to drive. Ray started to go out more and more after work. When I wasn't working, I would meet him so that we could eat. We went to happy hours that offered free hors d'oeuvres, and that was our dinner. Our first Christmas together, I made meatballs because ground beef was all that we could afford. I thought we were happy and all was well, but clues began to surface that contradicted my perception of our marriage. There was deceit, substance abuse, and adultery. Although my parents were not surprised, I was. I couldn't believe it. We had only been married for 3 years. I left my wedding ring on the table with a note and took only what I could fit in my car with me. I drove back home to Louisiana as a temporary fix because I knew that I didn't want to be there forever. I had gotten a taste for living in the city while living in New Orleans and then in Dallas. I knew I wanted to move away from my small hometown in Louisiana. At the time, my brother was working in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. He was sharing a place with my soon-to-be sister-in-law and another friend who was like another brother to me. I moved in with them. We found a place on the water in a 55-plus community. Yes, 4 20-something-year-olds living in a 55-plus community. We loved it. Rent was affordable when it was divided by 4. The problem was I didn't have a job. I had a merchandising degree, but only had worked in retail management where hours were long and the pay was low. This part of Florida was a big military area, so jobs were snatched up by locals and an influx of military spouses. I finally cried out to God one day. I vowed to go to church every Sunday if He would help me find a 9-to-5 job. He held up His end of the deal. I did not. I had grown far away from God, only praying if I had an emergency or I needed something. I am so grateful that He remained faithful, even when we do not. And you see this in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13, and it says, "If we are faithless, He remains faithful, for He cannot disown Himself." My 9-to-5 job was with Kelly Services. We provided temporary employees to companies in need of short-term help. The only reason I was even considered for the position was that the manager's wife worked retail, and he knew how hard she worked, so he assumed that I would be a hard worker too. He was correct. I really loved interviewing people and helping them find work. My income was better, but now I had a car payment along with rent and student loans. It was paycheck to paycheck for a very long while. At a monthly personnel meeting, I was introduced to someone who was running for president of that personnel association. His name was John. He was the polar opposite of Ray. He had a 4-year college degree and was the personnel manager of a manufacturing plant. He was your typical college fraternity preppy guy who was growing with his career. After just knowing him for a couple of months, he asked me out on a date. Unlike any other date I had ever been on previously, he paid attention to me and paid for everything. On our first date, he took me out to a fancy restaurant and sent flowers the next day. I had only heard of this type of life and had never experienced it. John and I dated for only a short while, and then he proposed. On paper, he was perfect and everything I thought I needed. I'm not sure if I was in love with him or the idea of what he represented. He brought maturity, stability, and loved me for me, or so I thought. We were married in December of 1988. Once we said "I do," it was off to a rough start. When 2 controlling people enter into a covenant, you are automatically set up for failure. I seriously considered leaving within the first 3 months of marriage, but I thought that people would think that something was wrong with me, and aside from that, I had nowhere to go and couldn't afford to live on my own anyway. This was another failed attempt in my life to do things on my own without seeking the Lord first. I was full of pride and thought that I knew what was best for me and my life. How very wrong I was, yet again. An amazing job opportunity came up for John in Atlanta, Georgia, with a major roofing company. I put in for a transfer with Kelly Services, so off to Atlanta we went. On the inside of our marriage, there was fighting and turmoil, but to the outside world, we were just the happy newlyweds. One of the perks with marrying someone who was in a fraternity is that you gain automatic friends who are at the same place in life. We had many newly married friends, and they were my saving grace. We did things with them every weekend. My thought was just to get through the week, and then I can breathe on the weekend and enjoy myself with them. Sad to say, I was living day to day, internally struggling, but God was nothing to me but a wishing well. It breaks my heart just thinking about how much He loves us. He loved us so much that He sent His only Son to die on the cross for us. And we see that in John 3:16. For God so loved the world, He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him shall not perish but have eternal life. So even though God loves us so much, I didn't even give Him the time of day. No wonder my life was such a struggle. If only I had connected the dots between thriving with God in my life and misery when He was not a critical part of my life. Thankfully, He never gives up on us. A fabulous opportunity came up for me in my career while in Atlanta. I was able to be part of a prototype for an on-site staffing agency with a major computer company. I dove into my work headfirst. Working 80 hours a week was commonplace. My husband was traveling for work and we didn't have children, so being apart during the week kept us married. I loved my job and everything about it. I gave it 110% every day and was compensated for it. I was making great money and was awarded multiple trips throughout the years. John and I were able to go on all expense-paid trips to the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, Puerto Vallarta, Vail, Colorado, and New York City. Work was great. Home life was barely tolerable. I even thought about committing suicide a couple of times, but the Lord spared me. After being married for 7 years, we had our first child. She was sweet, and still is, sassy and feisty. She was a little redhead. Although she was the love of our lives, home life was getting worse. Now we had a new topic to fight about, parenting. The first few years were very hard on all of us. We were juggling careers and parenting. Shortly after our daughter's second birthday, she started getting sick. She had chronic ear infections. Her fever would spike to over 105 degrees. Often, daycare would call us and tell us to meet them at the hospital with her. At that time, I was only occasionally going to church, when I needed something. So I was once again crying out to God and went to church alone one Sunday. I very clearly heard the Lord say for me to quit work and be a stay-at-home mom. No, Lord, I said, I love my job, and that is my only place of peace. Again, I knew that I clearly heard from Him, not audibly, but in my spirit. I had never experienced anything like that before, where the Lord was asking me to do something, and I really could hear that He was. After discussing it with John, he agreed, and we moved to another area of Atlanta. Fighting between John and I continued. We would go from full rage screaming to not speaking at all. I know our daughter witnessed this, and it broke my heart. 4 years later, we had a son. He was calm, sweet, and we now had another love of our lives. I did not know that you could love someone so much until our kids were born. This must be a small indication of how much God the Father loves us. We see that in John chapter 17, verse 26. I have revealed to them who you are, and I will continue to make you even more real to them, so that they may experience the same endless love that you have for me. For your love will now live in them, even as I live in them. I wanted to protect the kids from the fighting, the yelling, the screaming, but I could not. Fighting between John and I had not gotten physical, but it seemed to be heading that way. I prayed about leaving, but what would I do? I had not worked in almost a decade. In my logic, I thought that I should stay married because of the children, but I knew in my heart that I needed to leave for that very same reason. Trying to build up the courage to leave, I stayed up all night praying. The next morning, I asked God for a very specific sign. I had an admiration for St. Teresa, and she is known for her love of roses. So I asked God that if this is what He wanted me to do, I needed a sign and I needed a rose. I'm not even sure how that would work, but I asked anyway. The Lord is so gracious and merciful and meets us where we are. After not having any sleep the night before, I missed my exit when I was bringing the kids to school, so I had to turn onto a busy highway, and it was there that I saw something shiny in the middle of the road. After I dropped the kids off, I went back the same route to see if it was still there. This was in May, and the roads were very hot in Atlanta. I pulled my car over and got out to pick up the shiny item. In the middle of the hot highway was a small cone made of foil. Inside the cone were 3 beautiful, unblemished roses. I could barely believe my eyes. How are they here? God put them there, that's how. I don't even think we're supposed to ask for signs from heaven, but God met me in the place where I needed Him the most. I had my sign and my plan to leave. This was the first of many miracles along the way to God showing up and showing out. Justified or not, I feared for my life when leaving. I really started crying out to God then. I knew that I could not do this without Him. Matthew 19:26 says, "But what seems impossible to you is never impossible to God." This was the darkest time of my life, but this is where I found God in the midst of it all, thankfully. He has been a part of my daily walk since that very dark time. So thank you guys for being here again, and I will see you next week for chapter 3. Be blessed. Have a great day. Bye-bye.